my name is Dr. Liz Artolino. I am the university-wide chair of the IRB, so I oversee the entire IRB here at USA. And today we're going to talk about what the IRB is like and how you can submit to the IRB as a student. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, and let's get started here. So for your reference, the structure of the IRB is that we have actually 3 IRBs that make up one larger institutional IRB. So we have IRBs for each of our 3 geographical locations. So there's Florida, which consists of St. Augustine and Miami, Texas, which is where our Austin and Dallas campuses submit to, and then California, where our San Marcos campus submits. Each one of these geographical locations has its own individual chair. And so the chair in Texas is Lori Kopinski, the chair in Florida is Evan Puccillo, and the chair in California is Imana Keith. And then each one of them sort of report to me, and the 4 of us together oversee the regulations of the IRB. Each one of those locations has its own separate IRB members who are the ones who actually sit down and review all of the IRB submissions. And then we have one IRB administrator. Her name is Kylie Barlow. She's absolutely fantastic. So if you ever have any questions, I highly suggest reaching out to her through email or just pick up the phone and call her. However, when you are submitting to the IRB, you might wonder, well, which one do I submit to? You're going to submit to the one on whose campus you're assigned. So if you are a St. Augustine OTD student, you're going to submit to the Florida IRB. If you are an EDD student and your, let's say the chair of your dissertation committee is in Austin, you would submit to the Texas IRB. If you are a nursing student and your faculty advisor is in Miami, you would submit to the Florida IRB. And so that's how you will decide where to submit. So the IRB follows the guidelines that are put forward from different federal agencies. The first one is the Office for Human Research Protections, otherwise known as OHRP. And they put out what's called the Common Rule, or it was revised in 2018 to be the final rule. And all of these are sort of based upon the Belmont report. So as you go through your city training, you'll learn more about the Belmont report, more about the final rule and all of the federal regulations that the IRB has to follow. So sometimes when you submit to us, you might think that everything's great, and we might come back with some very nitpicky little details. And those little details are because we have to have them in place to meet federal regulations. It's not like we want to purposefully be nitpicky. It's because we have to make sure that we are abiding by these federal regulations. Okay, so the process for submitting an IRB application. First thing that you want to do is you want to go to the IRB website, and you can find that by, let me see if I can pull this up here. Okay, so you're going to go to My USA, you're going to go to Academics, and then along the left sidebar, you're going to see the IRB, and that takes you to our IRB website. Okay, it has all the information that you need to have on this one website, including the application. So if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, and please read all this information up top first, but if you scroll down to the bottom, it talks to you about the city program. We have links for all of our different consent forms. You'll see the boilerplate statements that need to be at the bottom of all of your recruitment flyers or any material that your potential subjects are going to be reading. And then when you go all the way down, you will see where's the application? I think I scrolled past it. Here's the application. Here's the application. Here's a little video that I made on how to fill out the application. Kylie Barlow has given you an example of an application, as well as a Word document that describes each section of the application and what needs to go into it. And then we've also got additional forms that you may need depending on what type of study you're doing. All right, so you are going to determine what level of review you need. Is it exempt? Is it expedited? Or do you need a convened review? You are going to download that application. You're going to fill it out. You're going to send it to your faculty advisor to review it. Your faculty advisor must review it and sign it, and they are the ones that need to submit it. Okay, you as a student cannot submit an IRB. Your faculty advisor must be the primary investigator or the supervising PI for students, and they are the ones that need to submit the application. So your faculty advisor is going to email it to Kylie Barlow, and at that point, Kylie and the geographical chair of the IRB will review your submission. And they will come back to you and say, this wasn't filled out correctly, or you forgot to check this box, or you need a signature here. Trust me, no application is ever perfect the first time you submit it. Even when I submit applications, and I've been on the IRB for over 10 years now, I still make mistakes. So don't feel bad when it gets sent back to you. Just make the corrections as quickly as you can, and then you're going to send it back to us. Once we are assured that all of the boxes are checked and all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, all of that good stuff, it will go to a second reviewer. That second reviewer is going to be the one who really kind of gets nitpicky and looking at, okay, are all the things that we need to see in this application to safeguard human subjects, are they all in here, and are they all written clearly so that we can understand it? And so if it is an expedited or an exempt review, that secondary reviewer will send back their decision to Kylie Barlow, and she will send you a letter either approving it or saying what modifications need to be made before it's approved. If you need a convened review, and we'll talk more about convened reviews, but these are reviews where either you're doing something that is a little bit more risky for subjects, or you're using a vulnerable population, then it has to go to the full board. And you'll see that the full board meets on very specific dates. Those dates are listed on the IRB website, and you must submit your application by the 1st of the month. So if you know that, hey, I need to start my study in June, so I want to submit to the IRB for approval in May, you must get it in by May 1st. And then the committee will meet usually sometime mid-May. They'll come back to you with edits, and usually you can get it approved by the start of the next month. All right, so city certification. This is sort of part of those federal guidelines that we have to show that all of the investigators have had training in human subjects protection. And so we, the university has, we've worked with City. We have a subscription to City, and you can take these City courses for free as long as you're affiliated with the university. And so we have particular modules that you will take. That information is on the IRB website, or you can email Kylie Barlow to figure out exactly what you need to take. But honestly, once you log in to City and register through USA, it will kind of ask you a series of questions about what kind of research you're doing. And once you go through that, it tells you what courses you need to take to get your City certification for USA. So you're going to download your certifications, and you're going to attach them to your application. Okay. So a lot of you are probably trying to decide what kind of study you're going to do. And studies can kind of fall into different types of categories. One thing that we look at the IRB to determine the level of review that you need is your study a prospective study, so one where you are going out and collecting new data, or is it a retrospective study where data has already been collected by another party or in another clinic, and now you are asking for permission to use that data for research purposes. So a prospective study, data has not been collected yet. You need IRB approval prior to collecting any data. So you cannot go out and start recruiting subjects and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this study. Would you be interested in being in it? You're not allowed to approach anybody, do anything until you have IRB approval. And then once you have that IRB approval, you'll have an informed consent form that's been approved. And then you have to provide your subjects with that informed consent in order to collect data on them. In a retrospective study, now we're looking at data that's already been in existence, right? So as I said before, maybe you're doing some field work in a clinic and they said, hey, our last 20 patients, we collected information about, you know, the number of wounds that they got in acute care. And we've got this sitting in all of their charts, but we don't have anything to do with it. And you might want to say, hey, that's interesting to me. I'd like to do a study on that. And so then you would go and get permission to be able to do that study. And so before you're allowed to look at any data that's already in existence, before you're allowed to look at it from a research perspective, you must have IRB approval. So even if your fieldwork coordinator says, hey, look, here are the 20 charts that we want you to review for your study, you have to say, I can't look at that until I have IRB approval. Okay, you get your approval from the IRB. Usually it's an exempt process, very, very quick. And then you can go right ahead and start reviewing that data. Technically, data in existence, you know, there are no live subjects. That data has already been collected. It was collected for non-research purposes. So you don't have to go hunt down those people and ask them to sign informed consent forms. As long as you have a letter of approval from the facility where you're getting that data from, you're good. Okay, so, all right, so here is an example. Okay, so last trimester, an instructor had their students do a formal reflection on their performance immediately after a practical exam using a new survey tool. The instructor collected all of the surveys as part of a grade in the course. After the course ended, the instructor realized that the surveys could be useful as research data and wants to submit an abstract to present a poster on the study at a national conference. So is this considered prospective or retrospective? Hopefully, as you're reading this, you're saying this is retrospective because this is data that was already collected, not as part of a study, just part of this course. And now this researcher wants to use it as a research study. Okay, so does the researcher need IRB approval prior to analyzing the survey results? Yes, they do. Okay, so before they can start analyzing these results from a research standpoint, now they may have already analyzed them to give these students grades, and that's okay. But now if they're starting to go back and run different statistics on them, now that's when they need IRB approval before they can start doing that. And does the researcher need IRB approval prior to submitting to the conference? Yes. So even if the conference submission date ends next week, that IRB, they can't submit unless they submit to IRB first. All right, so now let's say you've got a study and you're like, well, how do I know what level of review this is? Is it exempt or is it expedited? So if you are doing a retrospective study, it's automatically going to be exempt, okay? If you are doing some sort of educational research study where you're using normal educational practices, or you're looking at data that was normally collected within a course, that's going to be considered exempt. Most survey studies, as long as the subject's responses are anonymous or you have provisions in place to protect the subject's identity, then that's going to be considered exempt. In an exempt study, you do not have to have your subjects sign an informed consent form. So if you are having a survey and you've put it online on SurveyMonkey, all you have to do is have the informed consent form pasted into the front page of that survey. So before they see any questions, they have to read the informed consent form, and then all they do is hit the next button, and that takes them to the survey. And just at the kind of the last line of your informed consent will pretty much say, you know, by continuing to take the survey, you are consenting for us to use your information in this study. The good thing about exempt studies is that you don't have to go through any sort of continuing review, meaning that once the IRB says this is exempt, we don't need to see it anymore, we don't need to hear from you anymore, you don't need to submit once a year for a continuing review, or to say, hey, can I continue to have permission to do this study. In an expedited study, generally these are going to be most of your prospective studies that do not have greater than minimal risk. So anything that you would typically be doing with your patients in the clinic or in a hospital, if you're not adding in any sort of new interventions or anything that would be particularly dangerous, then it could be an expedited study. If you are not using vulnerable populations, so if you're not using pregnant women, not using children, not using people with diminished mental capacity or severe physical disabilities, then it can be expedited. You know, there are some studies or some surveys or qualitative interviews where if people are doing audio or video recording, then it needs to be expedited because we need people to sign an informed consent form. So in an expedited study, somebody must sign an informed consent form. And I mistakenly left in here, it cannot be electronic. So we don't accept electronic signatures in terms of using like Adobe Acrobat or anything like that. We do have a virtual consent process, and that is that's up on the IRB website. That tells you exactly how to do that. Or if you call up myself or Kylie Barlow, we can talk you through that procedure. But still, even if you're doing a virtual consent where you're doing a Zoom call like this and you talk the person through the informed consent form, they still need to physically sign that and email it or mail it or fax it back to you. In an expedited review, you do need to renew that IRB approval annually. So about a month before your IRB approval expires, you want to send Kylie Barlow an email and say, I want to continue this study. I'm still collecting data, or I'm still analyzing the data. Please renew my IRB. There's a little form that she'll send you to fill out. And then as long as everything's okay, you'll get continued approval for another year. With either one of these levels of review, or even with a convened review, any modifications that you make must require approval from the IRB. So for example, I was doing a study on children with spina bifida, and we decided halfway through the study, oh, we should be having parents fill out a quality of life survey because they're all talking to us about their child's quality of life. We should be measuring this. So even though it was a super easy survey that I could just give the parents and it had very little risk to it, I could not give it to those parents until I had approval from the IRB. So I just had to go in and make an amendment to my IRB and kind of highlight the changes that we made. And I sent it to the IRB, and somebody there read it. It went to a secondary reviewer. They said, okay, that's low risk. It's fine. You can do that. And then I got approval. And so then I was able to start collecting that data on those kids. You must use a boilerplate statement. And remember, I pointed out that you can find those on the IRB website. So on any material that your human subjects are going to see, so if it's a recruitment flyer, if it's an informed consent form, if it is a survey instrument that they're filling out, at the bottom of that, you must have this boilerplate statement that says that, that this material has been reviewed or has been reviewed and approved by the Institutional Review Board at USAHS. All right. So here's another little example for you. So a Doctor of Physical Therapy program decides it wants all of the incoming students to take the grit scale as part of its new program assessment policy. This policy will be implemented at the start of the next trimester. 2 faculty members decided they would like to use this grit scale data and compare it to student GPAs as part of a research study. So is this prospective or retrospective? Hopefully you're saying it's prospective, right? Because we have not yet started collecting this data. So we're looking ahead. These investigators are planning to do this in the future. It's new data that's going to be collected. Would this be considered exempt or expedited? Well, you might say, hey, it's part of this new program assessment. And so it's part of educational practices, so it should be exempt. However, in this case, because we're collecting student GPAs and we have to collect student names now on our grit scale to be able to kind of match up this data, now we're getting into a little bit more sensitive data. The data is not going to be totally anonymous. We'll keep it confidential, but it's not going to be anonymous. And so therefore it bumps it up a level and it has to be expedited. And so these researchers have to go to the students and ask for written permission, a signed informed consent form, to use their data as part of a study. I just answered that question. And so at what point do the investigators submit an application to the IRB? Really as soon as possible. So once they've designed this study and they know they're going to start collecting this data, they need to submit that IRB right away, and they cannot collect the data until after they have received that IRB. All right, a third example. Now we have an occupational therapy, a Doctor of Occupational Therapy student who's doing survey research for their capstone project. It's a qualitative study involving virtual interviews of individuals over the age of 65 to determine their mental health needs during the pandemic. The researchers are going to video record the interview. So is this prospective or retrospective? Obviously, it's going to be prospective. We haven't done these interviews yet. Would this be considered exempt or expedited? Well, usually interviews, survey type data, usually that can be exempt. However, in this case, because they are video recording the interview, it needs to be considered expedited, okay? And so therefore, the researchers are going to need a signed informed consent form from each subject. They can do that virtually, but they still need to watch that person sign the form, and that person needs to email that form back to them. All right, who submits the IRB application, the OTD student or the faculty advisor? Hopefully you remember from way back in the beginning of this little webinar that it has to be the faculty advisor. Students cannot submit directly to the IRB. The faculty advisor must sign the application and must submit it. All right, so the procedures section of the application is usually where most investigators get a little hung up. So here are a few little hints for writing the procedures section. The very first line of that section should always start with, after IRB approval is obtained, okay? So we need to know that you are not doing anything until you get IRB approval. After you get IRB approval, then you're going to tell us exactly what you're going to do in the study. And you're going to tell us it in a chronological order, right? Don't jump around and say, well, I'm going to virtually consent these students or these subjects, and I'm going to hang up flyers, or I'm going to post a flyer on Facebook to recruit the subjects. No, we need to see it in order, right? So first thing you're going to do most likely is recruit your subjects. After you recruit your subjects, you're going to consent your subjects. We want to know how you're going to consent your subjects. The next thing after consenting your subjects is then you'll collect the data, and then you're going to put exactly how you're collecting that data in chronological order. So you're going to keep this as brief as possible, right? We don't want to read a 20-page manuscript. We've got a very specific text box in there for you to fill out, but you do have to provide enough detail so that we can see exactly what's going to happen, so that we can determine if there are any risks to the human subjects, right? So if you're telling us, I'm collecting EMG data, right? We need to know, are you collecting EMG data by putting little sticky electrodes on it, or are you sticking needles into the patient's muscles to collect more fine wire EMGs? You know, if you are doing a balance test, or if you are drawing blood, right, we need to know who's administering that test, who's drawing the blood, who, you know, how is it going to be labeled, that kind of stuff. We need to know how the data is going to be secured. So you need to store your data in a locked cabinet. If it's on paper, if you have electronic data, all of that data has to be password protected. And we require that you keep data for a minimum of 3 years. If you know that you're submitting to a journal or some other conference proceedings where, you know, like I've submitted to a journal where they say you have to keep the data for a minimum of 5 years, that's okay. We just require that you put for at least 3 years, and then you're going to destroy it. All right, a few more things that you should do for when you're completing your application or when you're designing your study. First thing, if you're doing an online survey, make sure that you use an established online survey tool. So SurveyMonkey is a good one. All of your USAHS faculty members have kind of like the pro quality account, so we can design some pretty fancy surveys in there. Microsoft Forms can give you some really nice surveys. Qualtrics is another really great survey tool to use. So those are kind of the 3 that I generally recommend to students. In the benefits section, sometimes people say there are no benefits, right? Or there are no direct benefits to the participant. It's okay if there are no direct benefits to the participant, but there are always benefits, right? Or else why would you be doing this study, right? So even if the participant isn't benefiting, hopefully the greater field of nursing, PT, OT, PA, speech, whatever field you're in, hopefully what you're doing is promoting something within that field that's adding to the body of knowledge. And so that's going to be your benefit, right? And so you want to clearly state there are no anticipated direct benefits to the participant. However, knowledge from this study can add to the body of knowledge on such and such topic. In terms of risks, there are always risks, right? Even if somebody is just filling out a survey, they could be typing on the computer and they could break a nail, right? So you don't want them to come back and try to sue you or tell you that they broke a nail because they were filling out your survey. So if there truly are no risks, you can just put risks are no more than what occurs in everyday life. However, I do encourage you to truly think about, any sort of psychological or emotional risks that maybe some survey questions or interview questions might evoke in your clients or in your subjects. If you're doing any, if you're collecting physical data, right, think about fatigue that somebody might have, muscle soreness, bruising, things like that. All right, please, please, please download the application and the informed consent forms. Don't click on the link, and sometimes the link just opens up in a new tab on your computer. Don't start filling it in online because, then what happens is it changes our template and then everybody who clicks on the application is going to see your information. So you have to download it and save it as a new file with a new file name, and save it to your hard drive or to your OneDrive or wherever. And then you can fill it out and send it to us, and it will not change our templates online. But if we go into the online template and we see all your information, you're going to get an email from us telling you that that's what you did. And we won't be very happy about it, because then that's extra work for us that we have to go in and delete everything and upload clean templates. And then what you want to do is make sure that on whatever iteration of the application you are submitting to the IRB, that all the investigators are signing it. Sometimes when it goes through that initial screening process and Kylie sends it back to you and says, you need to change X, Y, and Z in the application, sometimes you as a student go in and you make the changes, but you don't have your faculty advisor re-sign it. Or if you have two faculty advisors, sometimes only one of them re-signs it and the other one doesn't. We need both investigators to sign it and date it with the current date, okay? Because we need to know that everybody is approving the changes that you made. And then please call Kylie Barlow if you have any questions. Her phone number is on the IRB website. She is lovely to talk to. She actually told me that she prefers to get phone calls instead of emails, because a lot of times emails aren't clearly stated or don't make sense, or she can't get the whole picture. But if she talks to you, she can kind of, you know, ask leading questions that can really help her answer your questions better. Okay, a few things I really want you to avoid. You cannot use Google Forms to collect online survey data. A lot of students say, oh, well, Google Forms, it's free, it's easy to set up, it's great. Even though Google Forms has a certain level of encryption, where like a hacker can't get into it, it's not considered secure by IRB standpoints, because Google actually will, Google can read the answers that your participants use, and they can use it to for marketing purposes. Okay, so we don't want, you know, if you're doing a survey of maybe you're surveying occupational therapists and asking them kind of what type of pediatric products they like the best, right? We don't want those OTs now, you know, to keep seeing ads pop up for the equipment that they're recommending in your survey, right? It's not going to make them feel very secure. Okay, I've already touched on the third bullet, but don't use old forms. So if you're, you know, if you're feeling lazy and you don't want to go up to the website and your faculty advisor's like, oh, here, this is the form that my last 3 students used, just fill that in. Don't do it, because sometimes we make minor changes to the forms. So the latest edition of the form is always going to be the one that's on the website. So just, I mean, I still even do it. Every time I go to do a new IRB application, I go to the website and I download the template again, just because I know that I'm using the most appropriate and the newest application. We've already touched on bullet number 3. Do not fill in the forms directly online. Download them, save them as a new, under a new file name, and then you're good to go. Do not use consent forms from other institutions, right? So if you are doing field work at some institution and they're like, oh, here's our IRB informed consent form. No, you have to use our informed consent form and get it approved by that institution's IRB. So if you are doing a dual IRB, meaning like the institution where maybe you're an EDD student and you are, you know, you're working at in a hospital system that has their own IRB. Maybe you're an EDD student and you are, you know, a professor in another university and you're going to be collecting data at that university. That's kind of another situation. We've got instructions for doing dual IRBs on the website, and you can also reach out to myself or reach out to Kylie Barlow or really any of the IRB chairs for instructions on how to do a dual IRB. And then as a student, please, please, please do not submit your application directly to us. Send it to your faculty advisor. Your faculty advisor will review it. They will sign it. They'll make sure everything's perfect, and then they will submit it to us. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. That's my email there, eartolino@usa.edu, or you can email Kylie Barlow at kbarlow@usa.edu. We've also just started offering open office hours for the IRB. This summer, we are hosting them the first Tuesday at every month at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So that's 2 p.m. Central time or 12 noon Pacific time. And you can click on that link there. I know you probably through this recording won't be able to click that link, but the links are available on iLife, or they also kind of get sent out from Barbara Freilinger every day, or you can email me and ask for the link and I will send it to you. So first Tuesday of every month or the third Wednesday of every month at 12 p.m. Eastern time, 11 a.m. Central time, 9 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, and at each of those open office hours, 2 of the IRB chairs will be there to help answer any questions that you might have. And so hopefully we're hoping this cuts down on the number of errors that people have in their IRB applications and just gives you a peace of mind and helps you design a good study. All right, well, thank you for watching this little webinar. I'm sorry more people did not join me live, but that's okay. So you've got my contact information. Reach out if you have any questions, and I will end it.